So we're really delighted to have Katrina Forsythe, who's a social care research fellow at Manchester University. And we're really pleased to have a social care researcher because, as you know, Department of Health and Social Care funds the NIHR, and the social care element is something that's new and emerging, and it's really important that we profile the work. So Katrina works in collaboration between the Offender Health Research Network and Social Care and Society, focusing on research concerning older adults in the social care and the social care needs of those in the criminal justice system. She's PI on a study looking at women's social care needs in prison and has an interest in qualitative research evaluation methods, particularly realist evaluation. So I'm hoping that Katrina is there. Yes, she is. So welcome, Katrina.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Can you all hear me okay? Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to come along to speak today. It was really interesting to hear that introduction and to hear the kind of enthusiasm for the potential career trajectories. And yeah, I was really keen to hear how passionate everybody was about that. So thank you. As pointed out, my name's Dr. Katrina Forsythe. I am a research fellow at the university, and I've also been recently appointed senior fellow for the School of Social Care Research, and I'm really excited about helping the school to build capacity in this area. So this is the perfect opportunity to start that, really. So I'm going to talk to you about a study that I am co-PI on, which is called Women's Social Care Needs in Prison, or WOSCIP. So firstly, I really wanted to emphasise how much this is a team approach. I was asked to reflect on why I thought this particular project was successful in obtaining funding. And I think one of the key reasons was that it very much was a collaboration from experts across a number of universities, as well as the Greater Manchester Mental Health Trust and the Prison Reform Trust in relation to our PPIE work, which I'll go in more detail to speak about shortly. So just to provide a bit of background information that you may or may not be familiar with. So in terms of social care in prison, we know that there is an increased level of need for social care in prison. And this is due to more people being convicted of crimes that they committed in previous decades. We have a general ageing population as well. And people are being sentenced to longer prison sentences. We know that the social care provision across the prison estate is very variable and patchy. And prior to the introduction of the Care Act, there was a lack of clarity around who was responsible for providing social care in prison. So the Care Act, which came about in 2014, as I'm sure many of you will be very familiar with, stipulated that it was local authorities' responsibility to identify and assess prisoners with social care need, to provide them with appropriate support, improve general well-being, and also ensure continuity of care. So before this, it wasn't clear to what extent prison officers, for example, should be involved, to what extent healthcare should be involved, and there was also limited examples of local authorities being integrated into the provision of social care in prison. So the Care Act also stipulated the 10 domains which are presented here for what local authorities should be working to support prisoners with. In terms of women's social care needs, there's been very little research in this area. We know that they're different from the needs of women who aren't in prison, and also they're different from the needs of men who are currently incarcerated. We know that half are excluded from school and most have experienced some sort of trauma or abuse. A third have been in care. 14% have experienced major depression. 51% are drug users and 20 to 24% have self-harmed. And that is higher than in the male prison estate. So the objectives of this study, of the WOSCIP study, there were 5 objectives. The first was to identify the nature and extent of need for women currently residing in prison, to look at the scope of service arrangements, and to develop an understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of the different approaches. Also to identify the extent and indicative cost of the services that are required to appropriately support women, and describe the key features of effective support. So there's 4 parts to the study. The first is the Prevalence Study. Work package 2 is a national survey. Third look is takes a case study approach, and the 4th work package involves a balance of care approach, which I'll explain in a bit more detail. So firstly, I'll look at the Prevalence Study. So this will fundamentally involve semi-structured interviews across 4 prisons. And we selected these prisons to best represent the women's estate in terms of their size, whether they were open or closed, public or private, whether they had any specialised units such as older prisoner units or social care units, etc. And the power size calculation established that we needed 247 participants in this part of the study. And the semi-structured interviews will cover the demographics, social and criminal history, alcoholism, drug use, mental health, their social care need, and also their cognition. So we have the advantage that this has actually been conducted as part of a previous study in the male estate, so we'll be adapting appropriately for the women's estate. Work package 2 is the national survey across the 12 women's prisons in England, and we will be distributing surveys to local authorities, prison governors, and as well as prison healthcare managers to try and get that 360-degree context. And we'll be asking about the number of women with these needs, because there isn't any data nationally around this, the type of services received, and the differences between prisons will be established. Again, we're fortunate that we'll be able to draw from the men's questionnaire and adapt it. The third work package will be the qualitative element of the studies, and this will involve 4 case studies looking at 4 local authorities with different models of social care practice that we've established through the survey have good practice. So this, for example, might be local authorities who have particularly innovative commissioning practices which allow services to be commissioned across health and social care services, or perhaps they may have a really well-established peer buddy scheme with appropriate training, support and evaluation. So that's some examples of what we might select via the surveys as examples of good practice. And we'll be conducting some in-depth interviews with the service users involved as well as the practice and managers, and we'll be doing about 32 of those interviews. The 4th and final package for this study is we'll be taking an adopted balance of care approach. So for this study, the first step will be to identify the case studies. So we'll look at the data that we are collecting through work package 1 and identify the most frequent subgroups with similar needs. Once we've identified those subgroups, we will produce some vignettes or personal stories that best represent those subgroups and take them to the workshops to get practitioners, managers and service users and ex-service users to consider what kind of services individuals would need for each of the subgroups that we've developed. And we're encouraging workshop participants to think about what's actually available in the community as good practice, and how that can be adapted for prison as appropriate. We weren't very much keen to encourage thinking outside the box there and not being limited by the restrictions that are often in place, such as the security arrangements and lack of resources in prison, and trying to establish what we would need to be in place to make sure there's equivalence of care to those who are living in the community. And then we take this to a workshop where the findings will be validated. So reflecting on why this particular project may, I think, have been successful. In terms of the research subject itself, we know that there is a real lack of research in this area, and the Care Act really provides a framework for this work. So we were able to clearly establish, like, since the introduction of the Care Act, what's happened before it and what has happened since. And there's also, because there's very clear definitions of what should be provided in the Care Act, we could really stipulate what our objectives were for this project in relation to all elements of the Care Act. So it gave a useful framework. We've previously conducted similar studies for men, so we were really able to go into deep explanations about what the challenges might be and how we would overcome them. For example, when you're doing a prevalence study and you've got to make sure you are interviewing a representative sample, the procedures would use to make appointments to check that why those people didn't turn up and follow up, etc. I think we were really able to highlight the practical benefits for service users and practitioners, because there's a real lack of evidence in this area, and we were able to establish how this will eventually lead to changes in service provision. I think what was also very useful here is we have a real body of work, of NIHR work, that we were able to show linked into this study. So we have a programme development grant that we're just completing at the moment, which is developing models of social care for men in the first instance, but we were able to establish how we could link into that. We're working with the Ministry of Justice to develop a national strategy for older prisoners. So again, we could show how this research could really be fed into policy. Also, we have work that we're starting looking at lower levels of social care need that don't meet the threshold. And we've previously conducted research looking at dementia in prison. So there was a real body of work that we could draw from and establish how this this particular study filled the gap in relation to women. So in terms of the process itself of completing the application, my experience is to divide tasks early on if you can, if you're working in a team, and not to underestimate how long all aspects of the form may take. Sometimes it can be easy to forget about the extra bits that you haven't perhaps given as much thought on. To keep revisiting the plan to work out if you're on schedule, and to get drafts out to the team as early as you can, because it does take longer than you think. And for example, I wasn't successful with another funding application recently, and I think there were just changes that we needed to keep making too close to the time really of submission. So I think learning from that experience that you need to leave time to change the design, and to assume no prior knowledge as well of the people reviewing the application, because it can be if you're working in an area, it can be very easy to assume that people might have some knowledge, but assuming they don't is very useful. Justifying all your decisions about why you've picked a certain sample size, for example, or a type of methodology is very useful. And here we've heard earlier today how important it is to build the capacity of early career researchers. So how that capacity building and how early career researchers are supported in the application is also really important. And this was one of my first as a co-principal investigator. So we were really able to demonstrate how I would receive support from my colleagues and what particular areas they would support me in. In terms of patient and public involvement and engagement, with this particular study, we have Paula Harriet, who's named as a co-applicant, and she works as a PPIE worker within the Prison Reform Trust. So she herself has lived experience of being in prison and has experience of leading PPIE, and she has a large network of people to draw from. And she's able to act as a point of liaison. We've actually had 3 meetings now, I think, with the PPI group, and it has really been so valuable to really think about what their real experience, and they make it so, they bring it to life for you really, to consider the trauma that they've experienced and how that impacts day in, day out on the social care in prison has been, they've really brought it home to what it's like to be in prison, that I think perhaps when you're working in your office, those important issues can be missed. We are developing PPIE work as part of our other work, looking at how we can develop PPIE across the criminal justice system. And so we set up some workshops to learn from other disciplines and how they use PPIE. And I think one of the things I really took home was to just get on with it. Like, don't wait for perfection, because sometimes you can be concerned about, oh, but these people always get involved, but perhaps they're your starting point, and perhaps these individuals can then help you recruit other PPI experts. So my advice would be, don't wait for perfection, but just to keep going, keep building on it, keep building rapport with individuals who are your PPIE and PPIE representatives. So for example, for this study, the individuals really highlighted how many people don't have accommodation, many people don't have clean underwear on release, and those kinds of issues that perhaps we wouldn't not think about or might not be discussed in the literature so broadly, they really helped to bring home for us. They also informed our dissemination strategy, thinking of things like how we can disseminate our research findings through prison radio, which they thought was really important. So some of the things that were brought up in the initial review, because this was a 2-stage process, the reviewers wanted us to consider how women's needs were different to men. So we were able to they wanted, to understand how we considered the women's specific needs. So we thought about how they were different from men. We discussed how the structure of the women's estate meant that the model needed to be different for men. And our experience of working with women to provide reassurance to the reviewers. I think we had, people within the team who are psychiatrists working in women's prison, and sometimes you forget to stress the obvious about their skills and experience and knowledge of working with women. They wanted us to increase our PPI budget, so we increased it to 15%. And they wanted to make sure we had considered everybody who was appropriate to be in our advisory group. So that was something else that I find is often brought up by reviewers. So in summary, I think we were able to clearly identify a gap in knowledge. We were able to clearly read the guidance and address all the points stipulated in it. We had a social framework to draw from, and we were able to establish our links with other work and to reassure the reviewers about our knowledge, skills and experience. And And I think the PPIE work really did strengthen our application, as well as it being a real team effort with all members contributing really meaningfully to all aspects of the application. That's the end. That's me. Thank you very much and good luck. I'm happy to take any questions if that's easy to facilitate.
Thank you so much, Katrina. I think there are a couple of really important messages there. One is linking it into kind of any national strategies like the strategic framework. Two, it's a team approach, and obviously the importance of delegating and working together in different parts of the grant. Three, the importance of PPIE. I think if you get this type of involvement, engagement wrong, it's just not going to work. And four, making sure that the funding is appropriate for the activities that you're looking at. Can I ask, while we look for questions in the audience, Katrina, can I just ask, you were talking about the support that you were offered from the university to help in your development as PI. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think it was about having appropriate mentors for appropriate aspects of the project. So, for example, I work very closely with two professors, one who has real expertise in forensic psychiatry and one who has real expertise in social care research. So we had, routine meetings that were set out in addition to the actual project meetings to work, to support me, to monitor progress, but also to link in with any training that was provided in the university more broadly about things like the joys of the finances and managing that aspects of the project. And the university has some great project management or research into management training that I am able to access, and we also costed in some external training sort of methodologically around realist methods as well. So it was kind of a number of different approaches to make sure I had the right support.
Yeah, and I think that's fairly critical in terms of your early postdoc career. Doing a PhD doesn't mean you're fully formed, and there's obviously that investment that needs to happen in your personal development. Any questions from the floor? Do we have oh, sorry, I should have gone to the virtual one first and then the floor, but we'll go to the floor. Oh, we'll go with the virtual first. Thanks, Charlie.
Lovely, thanks, Anne-Marie. We've got a question from Samantha. So I'm interested to know how Katrina pulled together the team. Had she worked with them before? Had she worked on a similar project, or was it a completely new team?
Thank you for that. In this instance, I'd worked with some members of the team. Like I explained, I work closely across social care and the Offender Health Research Network. But we actually had two colleagues from different universities who had heard of our work and approached us. And they had particular skills in social care. So it was an unusual in this one, but actually because they had approached us, they were so passionate and so involved throughout the process that was really helpful. I think sometimes when you approach co-applicants, maintaining engagement can be more challenging, but in this instance we were actually approached.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we had a question here.
Hello, I'm not sure I've ever used a microphone before. Thank you for sharing your research. It sounds really, really interesting. I just wondered, I work in a community trust and a lot of our work crosses over with social care and community partners. I just wondered if you had any advice on applying for ethics, particularly in cross-collaborative projects.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, with prison research, we have to apply for, the NHS, the prison, as well as the social services. I think it's just about communication, like anything comes to, really making sure everybody is really clear from the onset of what your aims and objectives are, and everybody's aware of what the needs are from each different team, so that it can be it can run smoothly. And I think what I've always tried to do with, for example, with the prison team, is actually involve people who will be helping you to day in, day out with the research very early, to ensure they can be involved in the application process and they can inform the application process for each of the ethical applications.
Thank you.
Thank you. Charlie, do we have any?
Yeah, we've got quite a few online
right.
questions.
Okay.
So for early career researchers, for example, in your last phase of your PhD, what is the first step in getting funding for a project to progress in one's career? Do you focus on getting a team for the project you have in mind first, or do you look to fit into an already set up an established research team?
There might be that a few of us want to answer this. I can answer that from my perspective. I probably and slightly unusual that I was quite integrated in a research team before I conducted my PhD, and so I'm perhaps different from most. But as we mentioned before, there's no real, everybody has a different approach. So I don't think there's a right answer to that, and I think either can work. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
So I can certainly perhaps comment, but the issue around getting your team is critical. So the team has to be a team that is able to support you to deliver on the project and have the skills to do that. They've also got to be people that you can work with. And I think that's really hard, negotiating and navigating your way through the people who will actually help rather than hinder, or who want to be hitchhikers on grants. And I think you need to be very careful about what people will contribute. So, but either establishing in an established team or kind of bringing a team together kind of depends on the question. Charlie.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. So next question. Are you expected to have done PPIE work before applying for an advanced fellowship to inform your application, or is all the PPI work done during the fellowship?
Would you like me to answer that, Katrina? Absolutely expected before the fellowship. It will be embedded into the fellowship, and luckily we have a couple of fantastic sessions focusing on how best to do that, which will be streamed as well as for the audience here. Any more? Brilliant. Oh, no, we've got two more. So...
Hi, I'm a public contributor. I just wondered, to what extent was PPI incorporated from the outset of your project? Was there co-production at the initial design and development stages?
Yes, thanks for your question. Yes, we have already established PPI, a PPI group that because we have a number of projects ongoing, we're fortunate that we had that established group and those established networks already. So we were able to consult and with a group living in the community and a group who actually were living in prison. So they helped with the design of the research and also in writing the plain English summary that went into the application. I think a few of them had been involved in previous studies which had really generated the ideas for the application as well.
Thank you. I think there was a last question over here.
Hiya. So I'm here as one of the mentors. So I'm thinking of people that are participating in this exercise. Have you got any advice for them on how to handle the interview that comes as part of this process?
I think that might be a question for you.
Well, We'll have a session, I won't steal others' thunder, but yes, the patient-public engagement is absolutely critical, and we'll spend some time kind of navigating through some of the how to, how not to, so we'll do that in a lot more detail. Brilliant. Katrina, thank you so much for coming to be our inspirational speaker. Hope the pressure wasn't too much, but you were very inspirational, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.